All right. So we were making this online banking app for a customer we have, and the technology of choice was Xamarin. And of course, being a online bank, security is paramount. So we had this third-party SDK that we had to integrate towards. But we hit a bit of a roadblock trying to integrate with it. It only worked partially, sort of, in Xamarin, and we were having like a really hard time trying to debug what was wrong. So, of course, given some time, we were kind of frustrated, so I tried another approach. One morning, I decided to recreate the app in React Native, because I was kind of familiar with it already. And it worked, totally fine. So basically, in one morning, I recreated the whole app with the same functionality before I went to eat lunch. So, hi everybody, and welcome to my talk about React Native. My name is Christian, and I'm a senior consultant at Novanet. We're a consultancy firm here in Oslo, working primarily with .NET. But today, I want to talk about React Native, which is a framework by Facebook for making apps with JavaScript. Now, 10 minutes is not a lot of time, so I'll just go into the basics, and then I'll follow it up with a couple of key reasons for why I think you should be using React Native. So, the boring bits first. Getting started, just read the docs. The instructions may vary depending on your OS, but the most important bits is installing the CLI, React Native CLI, and for iOS, installing Xcode, and for Android, Android Studio, and a couple of SDKs. So, once you've done that, you can go to your command line and type React Native init and some project name. And this will create your Hello World project, which is a starting point for your app. And once you've done that, you can go to your command line again and just type React Native run iOS or run Android inside your working directory. And that will open the app in your emulator or device, depending on what you have connected. So as you see here, here's basically a Hello World view with some basic information on what to do next. And if you want to edit this view, the app code or the view code itself is located in the generated project. So we have 2 JavaScript files which are generated. Other things that are generated as well are 2 native projects, one for iOS, one for Android, as well as the init command will download several npm packages and install them into your node modules folder. So if we drill into the package.json file, which describes these dependencies, then we only really see 2. React Native, of course, and React.js, which is a pair dependency of React Native. Now, the last bit there is kind of important because React Native does not work without React.js. It directly depends upon React.js. So when you're making the app, you're basically writing a JavaScript app, and you're writing a React app using components, JSX, state and props, and you also have the virtual DOM and the diffing algorithm working under the hood. Now, the scope of this talk is not to teach you React.js, so I won't dive directly into those concepts other than to say that if you already know React.js, that's awesome, that's a plus, but at the same time, if you don't, totally fine too, because it's really easy to get going with the React Native app, and it's easy to learn as you go along. And basically, that's what I did. So the interesting parts comes up when you talk about the differences between the two, which on the surface at least aren't a whole lot. So I have an example here. Here is the same component written in both React.js and React Native. And of course, the render function returns JSX, as it's called, the UI code. But of course, you see the difference is with React.js, it returns HTML. With React Native, it returns native elements, which are defined by the library. And so your typical div tag becomes a view tag, and your span tags become text, and so on. There are, of course, other minor differences and some bigger ones, but I won't go into them now. My only point here is to illustrate that both are using React components with the same life cycles, state and props, things you would know from using it in web. So just like with React.js, you can use components inside other components and send in behavior and values through props from parent component into child component. And in this way, you can compose together many React components and using domain logic to the side here, illustrated to the side in plain JavaScript, and in this way, make a complete app. And that's the basics of React Native. There's many more concepts to talk about, but that's the basics. So to get back to the points I made during the intro, why did we choose to go for React Native? And what are potential reasons for why you should choose it? I have a couple of key reasons there. So first off, quick iterations. So with React Native, it's easy to prototype a new app and then quickly iterate that app towards something that is production worthy. And you can do this because you rarely need to compile the app. So I have an example here. Here's your basic counter app with a view that keeps on countering up, and I can remove and I can add, etc. And if I've gone into the dev menu here and enabled hot reloading, which I've already done, then I can change any style, business logic, UI code, any part of the JavaScript, and it will instantly update in the emulator or device. So for example, let's say I'm not really that satisfied with the font text there. I can save. It's right there. Same with the text. Who knows what decrement means? So let's call it remove, add, save, and it updates. And as you may see, the counter keeps on counting up, which means the state of the app continues. And it can do this because it's only hot patching in the bits that have changed. And this gives you, basically, this means you, for example, can be on a screen which is far into some navigation tree, and you don't have to reload or recompile the app and then navigate all the way back to that screen in order to view your changes. It's just there instantly. And this means a quicker feedback loop, and you're more productive. So that's number one. Number two, you can reuse existing web development skills. So you might be familiar with hybrid apps, and just like there, you can use JavaScript. But you also have access to more advanced ES6 and ES7 features. And to make it even more like making a web app, they have also re-implemented several familiar functions like set interval, set timeout, console log, stuff you might be familiar with. But I think probably the coolest thing about developing React Native apps is that I can debug with Chrome, which is really powerful. So I have an example here as well. So let's say I've gone into the dev menu, React Native dev menu, and enabled remote debugging, which I've already done. Then I can go to this form here, which is basically a sign-up form. So looking into the code, the first input field, the first name field, has a callback added to the onChangeText prop here. And that is bound to the onChangeName function here on the component. And that will, in turn, use console log to log out to the Chrome console. So if I open up that one, basically, it gives you some basic information on what to do. But if I go into the console here and I start typing, it's logging out. Not so amazing, but something you would expect from web. But I can do one further. I can go into the sources and add a breakpoint into that function. And if I then go back to the app and continue typing, it will break into the same function. And like web, I get call stack, I get scope variables, everything I would expect. And this makes it really easy to debug the logic of your app, which I think is awesome. Other things, this is a JavaScript app, so you can use NPM packages from the JS ecosystem. And this is huge, in my opinion, because there's already a lot of utilities available for both web and Node.js, which you can reuse. You can't reuse everything, but most. Another cool thing is for C# developers here, it's easy to add static typing with TypeScript or Flow, which gives you, for example, I've done that in my demo app, so I get both IntelliSense, warnings, compiler errors, and so on. Third point, cross-platform code. So with React Native, the same code will run on both iOS and Android. It's JavaScript code. But what may not be apparent here is that the same UI code will render on both iOS and Android. But what's really important to remember is that the views, unlike hybrid apps, are not running inside a browser or a web view. They are actually rendering native elements. So basically, the JSX code is translated to native elements. and will render as such, and in that way make the app look like a native app. And not only that, you also get native animations with the native driver, which means the app will feel like a native app. And in this way, basically, a React Native app is indistinguishable from a native app. So at this point, I probably sound like a huge fan of React Native, which I am. I'll see if I have nothing bad to say about it. But is it a silver bullet? No, definitely not. It depends on your use case. But the scope of that discussion is a bit too long, so I'll rather invite you to come up to me later after the talk and discuss it with me. So, conclusion. React Native allows you to write a cross-platform app, which is indistinguishable from a native app, using a single language, JavaScript, using skills and tools you may already be familiar with, and it lets you be productive in this way. Questions?
Can you maybe quickly provide an example of what you wouldn't do with the React Native? For example, some kind of feature that you would use native app or something else?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, any type of games, anything like that, makes no sense to use React Native. There are, like I said, you have native animations, but some of the animations are rendered with JavaScript. So if there's some huge performance issue you need to tackle, then that might be a thing. But even then, React Native will probably give you the speed you want with the virtual DOM and the diffing algorithm already being so quick. And honestly, like comparing it to something like Xamarin, which I've also worked with, I don't want to talk bad about Xamarin. If you have just a C# team, that may suit your use case. But yeah, basically that. Depends on what your team knows. But I find JavaScript to be a sort of language that unites many developers. So if you have some front-end developers, some Java, some C#, then maybe React Native will unite them to be able to work on one common app. Yeah. Any other questions?
So why not just React and normal application with React with offline support?
You mean like a universal web app or something like that? Totally fine. I mean, it depends on what your customer wants. I've looked somewhat into that, and it looks compelling in its own way. But it may be more difficult to actually work with native libraries and stuff like that. If, for example, in this banking app, we had to use a security SDK, which was kind of important, and the whole point was that we wanted the easier fingerprint logins and stuff like that, and that enabled that. So again, depends on your use case, and React Native is not a silver bullet, as I said. Yeah.
What about more advanced stuff like notifications, media controllers? Are there libraries for that?
A lot of them are, I mean, since it's open source, a lot of them are provided by other contributors in the open source world. I have two libraries, actually, one for Google Analytics and one for Android Building, so look up those if you want. But a lot of it is already ported, so, I mean, I can't think of anything that's not ported, actually. And it's not really a matter of porting, it's more about building a bridge between JavaScript and the native side, which is pretty simple, actually. I'm not sure how I am on time, but done? Yeah. Thank you.